Philosophical supplements for your attitude health. Philosophical supplements for your attitude health. Philosophical supplements for your attitude health. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the JKWD podcast, where we are always practicing to make ourselves better. Kelvin, how you doing today?
Good morning, Mr. Shear. I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much. Getting a kick out of you. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. Sitting here presently, nobody can see it, looking at the Halloween virtual background I have on my Zoom, and looking out my window here at what is excellent weather for New York this time of year. And I got a fresh cup of coffee. One of my best friends on the planet on the screen with me. I'm doing good.
All right. I'm sitting here listening to a dog chomp on a marrow bone. And
oh, cool. That whole marrow bone chomping thing ought to be pretty cool for him.
And I got me some Kelvin. So what could be bad about today?
Nothing, except the weight I gained eating the candy you sent me last week. But that's not bad. It was nourishment.
Two of those things, and you don't need dinner. So
not for caloric intake. You don't need it, boy. I'll tell you what. But yeah, life is good.
Good. Well,
so
we're brought to you today by Vitamin K Daily Sophilical Supplements for your. How did that go again?
Did you do that on purpose? Come on.
Of course, I did that on purpose. I'm not that bad. When I mess it up, I usually only mess it up a little bit. Philosophical supplements for your attitude health. Get your daily dose of positive from the Prince of Positive himself. Wake up every day, Monday through Friday. Find out why today is going to be a great day, and you can get your first 4 weeks free. Go to vitaminkdaily.com. After that 4 weeks, $24.95 a year. Not so bad. Get in now before that price triples or quadruples or goes up by a multiple of 10 or whatever you're going to do to it.
That's only like 49 cents a week. It's pretty good.
Pretty darn good.
So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So, as vitaminkdaily.com, hey, if it's not for you, cancel before the end of those 4 weeks and you won't get charged one red 9.5 cents, because that's the daily cost when you break it down.
There you go.
vitaminkdaily.com. Let's do the show.
Podcast, where we talk about better humanhood and teach you how to dominate your world. You ready? Here we go.
So I have this quote on my whiteboard under the JKWD schedule, and it goes like this. The longer I live, the more complex the world seems. The longer I live, the more complex the world seems. So I thought we might riff on that today.
I can agree with that.
Well, I hope so, because you said it to me last week while we were on a call.
That'll teach you to listen to me.
I figured you probably didn't remember saying that. So my next thing was going to be guess where I got that quote. But
you got to quit hanging around with that guy, man. I'll tell you what. I I agree. I know I said it, and I probably took a big chunk out of life to put that together too, because how complex the world is kind of depends on what you're doing in the world.
Or at least what you're taking in from the world.
Well, I think those two can go hand in hand. If all I want to do is sit home, watch a little TV, which in and of itself is a little complex since you can't just throw up the antenna anymore and just get those 3 fuzzy channels that come in. That's how old I am. Right? Man, when cable TV started, I thought that was the weirdest thing. However, if you just go about from place to place doing not much, there's not a lot of complexity, generally speaking, I think. This is when you try to do something.
Well, I mean, are you talking red tape and bureaucratic complexity, or?
Well, that too. And then we have things like politics, which I typically don't do.
Been hard to avoid the last couple of months here, though.
It's been hard to avoid the last couple of months, and a lot of other stuff. When I grew up, sexuality was kind of cut and dried. It was black and white, men and women, male and female, and that portion of life has gotten way more complex as far as just understanding what's going on out there and what all the current sides of that are. We didn't have things like iPhones. We didn't have satellite. Well, I guess we had satellites, but we don't have what we got today for satellites. And when you want to go do something, you just went to do it. I guess we still had airplanes, but that wasn't in my wheelhouse back in then. We weren't flying airplanes when I was a kid too much. So, but yeah, and it's just kind of different. And when you start looking at political views, and if you go to politics, you can just drive yourself crazy. But there are so many things happening in the world, so many mindsets, so many inventions, so many things that you can go crazy if you try to follow them all.
Well, just this week, as we're recording, so about 2 weeks ago, as this comes out, a hybrid flying car has been approved as road legal in Holland.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and this thing has a rotor, but the flight is powered by a separate. It has an above the vehicle rotor, but
it's a helicopter thing, yeah.
Yeah, but its flight is propelled by a propeller engine in the back, so it needs runway space to take off and land. Like, it can't go straight up and down. It needs, I think it said 500 feet of road space to take off and 100 feet to land. But you can drive it around. Car.
Meet George Jetson, almost. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely getting there. So the world is getting, you said inventions, but when you talk about complexity, like in the, description of sexuality, I guess, is really what you're talking about. When you were growing up, when you were growing up, there were certainly gay people and there were certainly bisexual people, but they kind of lived in shadows and underground and weren't allowed to. They really weren't allowed to tell people. about it, but it's nice that we live in a world where identity politics really, and not just sexuality, but in race and political views and even religious identity.
Oh yes, that's gotten complex.
But the fact that this is something we're worried about, that we're concerned about, means that we're not worried about starving, and we're not worried about drought, and we're not worried about tigers in the bushes, right? It means that we have brain space to actually be concerned about this stuff.
Well, and we got some people who are worried about starving.
Yeah.
But
those people who are actually worried about starving, not worried about identity politics.
I give you that. I'll give you that.
And then, on top of that, when you talk about complexity, what I think of is things. I mean, this past year in the U.S., we've seen a lot of protests around race, particularly after the killing of George Floyd. And I remember we've talked about this a little bit. I don't know how much we've talked about it on the podcast, but we talked about it going, weaving back the last few years, through the, through some, killings of black people by Eric Garner and Michael Brown and Ferguson and all that. And, if you look at enough context, you draw back through, redlining through the 50s and 60s, and you go back to Tulsa in the 20s, question mark.
And I didn't even know about Tulsa until doing some research after George Floyd. And there was some place in Florida too. I forget what that name was, but we keep, strangely enough, even in modern day, we keep learning about things in past days to bring forward to add to the fires.
Right, and so some of that is retrospective analysis, right? Some of that's and as such may not be accurate, right? I think we'll get more in depth in this in a few weeks. You don't know this yet, but I have said.
I always like finding out things on a podcast.
I have for us to talk about. We actually have an episode that comes out on Pearl Harbor Day, so I'm going to talk about Black Swan events and and that kind of thing. But it always seems easier to explain an event by past events and build up to that event.
Right.
It's always easy to say we should have seen it coming, or obviously it happened because of. When that really is kind of retrospective thinking, like it's like, no, it wasn't obvious, and it didn't obviously derive from that. It just,
it certainly wasn't obvious at the time.
Right. It might be one in a line of, but that doesn't mean it was caused by. But yes, you can absolutely draw parallels. Mint Press did a long series on Jeffrey Epstein, and it traced the sort of thing that he was doing. This kind of not he was accused of pedophilia, but there was the sexual blackmail, of bringing famous people into his living space with young girls and filming them, even if not in actually improper actions, at least implied. And apparently this sort of thing like goes back sometime, through J. Edgar Hoover's FBI and beyond to Meyer Lansky and some 1930s mob connections to the U.S. And government. And I don't know, again, retrospective analysis.
Right.
Is this stuff necessarily a through line? I don't know. Maybe. We do know that some people knew both Roy Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein, and that there seemed to be kind of a handoff there in the mid '80s. But how much of that is oddly coincidental or kind of manufactured assumption?
Right.
But I'm getting the feeling, especially by looking at your face right now, that is not what you had meant when you were talking about complexity, increased complexity.
Well, no, I mean, not specifically, but that's part of the complexity.
Right.
Part of the current day complexity is because of the number of things we're bringing from the past to add relevance to the present, which may not have been seen before. So, we have things we can hate people for today that happened 300 years ago that we didn't know about until, well, at least some of us didn't know about until, just a little while ago. And one of the things that I have said in some of our podcasts, or maybe our private conversations, was that, we went through history having certain mindsets and so forth. And as we have come through history, our consciousness, overall consciousness has changed, and things that used to be quote unquote acceptable or just part of daily living are now in this current day open and not valid. So we changed that. So we've changed our consciousness. We've changed our rules. But as a society, we tend to go back in history and retroactively convict, from the past. When the rule of the day back then was one thing, but now it's like, okay, so it's a bad thing here. So now you did this 200 years ago before we even thought about changing it here, so you're guilty, and therefore everything that you stand for, no matter what you did good that was potentially good, is now irrelevant because
we keep moving the line.
That's it.
An easy example is Mark Twain, right? Great American writer.
Absolutely.
It used what are now offensive terms for Black people and Native Americans frequently. Just had no particular hatred. It was
just a conversation. That's what you called stuff.
That was the term in use. So,
and Dr. Zeus, who I don't know if we can actually talk about him, but Dr. Seuss got some good stuff out there.
Yeah, well, Dr. Seuss played an outside role in my childhood because I grew up down the street from where he lived, and there's a large memorial sculpture garden to him at the museums in the town where he lived there most of his adult American life.
Right.
But yeah, and some of his illustrations are, now we'd see them as obvious caricatures, and
and we can. I mean, sometimes we assign meanings, personal opinion, to things that were not intended at the time, or at least at the time were part of the social consciousness, and we continue to evolve there, and based on we're not in the Star Trek world yet. I used to watch Star Trek, and what I determined was that Star Trek was a great way to bring about all kinds of recognition of things that were happening socially that many of us just knew not of. You'd have to watch it now to go back and see what it was talking about back then, going, oh my gosh. Well, you remember an episode, they covered this in this episode of Star Trek.
How do you mean? How do you mean for those of us who never watched it?
Well, we had there was one issue, for instance, in Star Trek where the society, male female relationships were outlawed. That didn't happen, and the people didn't have that. So when I don't remember what planet it was. So Will Riker, ended up falling in love with one of the natives of this particular planet who was female, and that was taboo. So that episode in Star Trek had to do with him falling in love with her and vice versa, and by the time the show was over, they had put her in a piece of equipment and fixed her so that she was no longer broken, and they were then non-sexual, and it was like I was fairly young at the time. So by the time that came back to modern day, it was like, oh, they handled a lot of issues on Star Trek like that. Star Trek essentially had no racial bias, although we had a lot of different types entities.
Star Trek was one of the early shows that so the Next Generation, I think, had more racial diversity on the cast, but there was species diversity, I think.
Absolutely.
In the original show, which I think which is a substitute for racial diversity, but that would have been. That would have been one of the few shows to do that. I mean, when Mr. Rogers shared a wading pool with his black mailman, that was even later in Star Trek's run, I think. Mm-hmm. That was revolutionary television.
Yeah.
That was really tackling stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff got tackled back then. And
MASH used to do the same thing, I think, right?
MASH?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember MASH. MASH was good. Yeah. So, but our social consciousness has been changing, has been evolving. And it's just difficult because if you go far enough back, you can invalidate everything the civilization has done. Sure.
You keep moving the bar enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's tough. So when I start talking about it being complex, I mean, I'm 67 years old. There's still stuff coming to me that I'm like, I didn't know about that. Now, so far as I know, I have never actually hated anyone because of their sexual orientation or their color. You know, even the white folks that used to collect our rent back back when I was 5 or 6, you know, they were okay and nice people. So, I mean, but the issues far surpass that now. I mean, morality is huge. I mean, it covers a lot more than it used to. Right and wrong, shades of gray.
Yeah, a lot more subjective now too, right?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, and subjective person to person.
Yeah.
So that now in lies the complexity, because it's not even a matter of what I believe, what you believe, but even, I mean, we can't, in many cases, have a conversation because our beliefs are different. So that's just going to be a knockdown, drag out. We can't have a conversation about the philosophies behind them or anything. So
right.
that kind of complexity. So, and I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
So, you know, is it really becoming more complex? Or
are we
just
yeah.
We said the same words at the same time. That's dangerous. We can't do that.
Finish we're just kind of trying to shove everything into smaller and smaller holes, and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, we keep going back to locker C18 though.
That's right.
We keep going back to that. Lives we just don't know. Other lives that are.
Yeah, well, and it becomes increasingly easy to live in these silos, right?
Yeah.
The more we're at home, the more we can sit on Twitter, the more we can sit on Facebook, and the algorithm really puts us in a place, right?
Yeah. So there we are.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that was me.
One of my advantages being in the military, I think, starting at 17, even so, I graduated from high school in 1971, is being in the military put me into contact with different races, different nationalities, different, all that stuff back in the military. When at the time, for the most part, being in the military took precedence over the differences between the people who were in the military.
Yeah, but the generation before you, that wasn't true. There were
true.
That again, evolved in your time.
Yeah. But at the time, it was.
Yeah.
It was. That's what was going on. So. Yeah, and then I found out some of the stuff that happened in and around the military prior to that, and it's like, oh, what do you do? I joined the military because of overwhelming faith in my government and stuff, and through the Martin Luther King era, and later I get to see some of the stuff that was going on back there. There was a CNN documentary one time about everything through, from John F. Kennedy through Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and all those things. And the things that were happening in that I said, hey, we look like just like some of those countries we invaded to stop that kind of thing. Right. And I was depressed for 2 weeks, I think, because I'm like, oh, look, we look just like them. But back in, day-to-day life, I'm back to being me and treating people and listening to people and valuing people, which I never had a problem with before. So it's, I think the systemic part of it unnerved me a bit, and the systemic keeps coming up. So it's getting more and more complex. So I guess the question is, how can we take that complexity and bring it to a point where we adjust to it, not forget it, not forgive it, adjust to it, deal with it without destroying our minds?
Right. Yeah. Actually, that was I was going to lead us there too. I was going to say, how do we? What's the solution for getting us in on track? And since you asked it first, I guess it's up to me to answer first. So,
I'm okay with that.
yeah, I think it becomes um, shutting down our silos first of all, and talking to people who um, look different from us, who think differently from us, um, who have different experiences, even growing up. Get off Twitter and walk out your door. We don't have. We might meet the same diversity of people that we wind up arguing with on Twitter. We might meet that same diversity of people at the local bar, but we have like actual conversations and learn about each other when we're sitting there with a beer. Then we do.
Depends on which beer. Like how far into the beers we go.
Well,
with one in might not be a good time to start that conversation.
But if we're sitting there with somebody, we're more likely to learn about them and have a civil conversation than we are on Twitter, where things escalate very quickly.
Very quickly.
Right. And, I think when we sit and talk to people, instead of just learning about them on TV, we're more empathetic. Oh, hey, like that guy's not that bad just because he holds that belief. And just because he holds that belief doesn't mean he holds these 15 other beliefs that, CNN says he holds or Fox.
Yeah. Like, the media tends to make things very absolute.
Right. And then that gets blown up even more because we allow it.
Yeah. So I've always been, I've got, friends around the world for all kinds of reasons. I mean, we take out my military background where I got to meet people for 20 years from different lands and go live in those lands and know those people and how they are. And when I came out, I ended up working at University Hospital with a gentleman who was working on a particular genetic syndrome that affected people around the world. So from that regard, out of the military, I got to meet people from a whole bunch of countries that were afflicted by this disease, this syndrome, this genetic syndrome, which actually affected every population that touched the exact same way. We could take people from 10 different countries, 10 different ethnicities, put them all in a room together, and they all look like they had the same father because of the manifestations of the syndrome. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. So you get to overcome that because in that disease, black, white, orange, purple didn't matter. The disease, the syndrome that affected them was what was matter. And we got to pull people into relationships because there was something bigger than just the color of their skin and what country they were born in.
Right. Not that we want widespread disease or deficiency or deformity.
That is correct. That was not the point of my conversation.
But there are some great equalizers out there.
Yeah.
Some of them positive, some of them not so positive.
Correct.
And some of them that wind up not so positive are exacerbated by some of those differences and a little more equality of opportunity would be.
So again, it's gonna come down to the individual,
right,
that wants to make the difference and not be a part of knee-jerk kind of a thing.
Right.
I like people.
Me too.
Pretty much.
Too.
As long as you don't intend me harm, we can probably have a conversation.
And even then, we might be able to have a conversation. Depends on how much harm you intend me.
Yeah, we'll have to increase the distance a little bit, most likely. We want to reduce the ability to actually inflict it quickly,
Right.
But yeah, I most human beings I've been able to have great conversations with, and the ones I couldn't, I let go. But that really, seriously, that's been a fairly small percentage of the people I've met in my life. So I'm okay where I am as long as people are willing to hear what I'm saying and not interpret it before it gets there. So if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. We talked about that way back in our episode on communication.
Yeah. So here we go.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
Forward, sir. Always forward.
Beg your pardon?
Forward, sir. Always forward.
Excellent.
All right.
Excellent. So
ironing out complexities, keep it simple, talk to each other. And things don't have to be that tangled.
They don't.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Rate, review, share. VitaminKDaily.com. Philosophical supplements for your attitude, health. Philosophical supplements for your attitude, health. Philosophical supplements for your attitude, health. JacobPodcast.com for show notes for this and all our other episodes, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Show notes and more at jkwdpodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week. Bye! A Better Humanhood production.